welcome to the first episode of Based. I'm so excited. I have been thinking about doing this podcast for at least 3-4 years since I was back with the Beacon Center in Tennessee, and I have just not had the capacity, maybe a little bit of the courage and the audio tech skills to get it off the ground. If you follow me, you know that usually outside of COVID, I am a road warrior. I'm traveling all over the country, passing bills, meeting with people. I love that aspect of my job, but it doesn't leave a ton of time for writing, producing content like this. So I'm actually really enjoying some of the aspects of COVID because it's allowing me to pursue things that I've had on my plate or in the back of my mind for a long time. The reason I first came up with this vodcast, was because when I started working in politics, what I started noticing as somebody who is pretty middle of the road, I'm a libertarian, classical liberal type, so I can agree with both sides on certain things, and I adamantly disagree with sides on both things. So I started noticing, though, that there were a lot of people that were kind of like that, right? They were sort of in the middle. Maybe they leaned left, maybe they leaned right, but we could agree on a lot of problems, right? Like I can agree with very far left people that corporate welfare is a huge issue. I can agree that cronyism is a big problem, that there's a lot of corruption in our government, that the system is rigged. I agree that we need to have a non-interventionist foreign policy. With people on the right, I agree with all of the fiscal intentions, right? I want a free market. I want little government regulation, intervention into our society and into the free market choices of buyers and sellers. But what I found was that where we disagreed was on the solutions. So many times I would be having a great conversation with somebody, we'd be on the same page, and then they'd be like, yeah, that's why we need the government to do this. And I'd be like, hang on, that's the wrong direction. That's the whole reason this is a problem in the first place is because the government got involved. Like let's look at it, take a couple steps backwards. And so that's why this podcast is called Based. I want to look at the base problems that we face in society. I want to take time to figure out what caused the problems that we're currently dealing with, so that when we start trying to come up with solutions, when we start looking at policy proposals and things we want to have happen, we have a better framework that we're working within, and we don't accidentally prescribe more of the same things that got us to where we are in the first place. So that's the concept behind it. I'm super excited. I'm kind of based myself. I'm going to be up front, but I'm nice. I'm not somebody here who's trying to own people or get clicks. I'm sure that would get me a lot more attention, but that's not how I handle things. I respect people. I want to have intellectual discussions. I want to be fair, and I want to really understand where we can come together to make our society better. So that's where I'm coming from. If you don't know me, if this is the first time you're coming across this, you don't follow me on social media, my name is Hannah Cox. I have been in politics full-time since 2016. I used to be in the music industry. I got really burdened about the things that were going on in our government and in our society. I saw a lot of injustice around me, and it got to a point where I just felt like I had to get involved. I had to do something, and so I transitioned. I've been working on many policies over the past 4 years, namely criminal justice reform, really involved with overturning the death penalty. That's a big thing to me. But I've also done a lot of things around education, around healthcare, tax policy, corporate welfare, worked around some pro bono constitutional litigation. So I've been in the weeds with it. I'm working on this day in, day out. I'm not somebody that just sits around and talks about things. I actually get my hands dirty. So that's where I'm at. If you don't already follow me on social media, you can find me at Twitter, Hannah Cox 7, or on Facebook. I have a public Facebook. It's Hannah Danielle Cox 7. So add me there. You can see what I think about a full range of topics. Or if you just follow me here, that's great as well. One thing I want to say is thank you to Young Voices. They are an incredible nonprofit that helps get young libertarian, conservative writers, commentators, broadcast journalists into the media, try to make sure that they have platforms and access to develop their careers. I think they do incredible work, and I actually got in touch with Stephen Kent at Young Voices a few months ago, let him know that this was something I was thinking about. I let him know that I am a tech boomer. I don't know how to do literally, and I don't know why I'm so bad at technology. I'm not even an old millennial. I'm like dead in the middle of millennials, so it shouldn't be that hard for me, but I really struggle. And, making a podcast is a lot more than just sitting here and talking, which I could do all day. A little bit nerve-wracking, but still really fun and creative. All the back end to releasing a podcast is where I knew I would struggle. Learning GarageBand, learning iMovie, all of these different platforms that you need to get subscribed to and get your content up on. They have been incredible at helping me get this off the ground. So thank you to them. I'm super appreciative. All right, now we're ready to jump in. I have like actual notes in front of me. I've made a handwritten outline because there's so much to talk about within this subject matter, and I didn't want to leave anything out. So if you hear papers moving around, that's what that is. Bear with me. Today, we're talking about something that frustrates me for two reasons. We're going to be talking about democratic socialism. And we're talking about a very specific type of the discussion right now, because we could spend probably 3, 4, 5 hours debating the merits of socialism. I'm not doing that today. I'm sure I will in future episodes. But first, I want us to get on the same page about something that I think many Americans are being misled around. And it makes me upset because the Americans that I think are being misled around this are, again, people that I could actually get on board with a lot of their policies. People who support democratic socialism and I agree that we need to have a fair society. We agree that we need people to be able to have their needs met. There's a lot we can get together on. We agree on social justice issues, civil liberties. We agree on foreign policy. There's so much there. But they are supporting a system that is, in my opinion, the exact opposite of the way we need to go to ensure that we get these things in society, which is a system that rewards more power, more money, more control to the government that has created many of these problems in the first place. So that's for another episode, but I just do want to be upfront. I'm not a supporter of socialism, so I am coming at it from this framework. But more importantly, I think there's been a lot of confusion where right now, especially among people my age, there's an impression that there is socialism and then there's democratic socialism, and that they are somehow different. And I started digging into the roots of this because I was really trying to figure it out. I grew up reading a ton of history, reading a ton of political science. I was a weird, nerdy kid. I was homeschooled. I just fit that stereotype. So this is what I did with a lot of my childhood. I knew a lot about socialism. I had never heard the word democratic socialism. And when it first really sprung on the scene, which for me was around 2016 with Bernie Sanders' candidacy, I was really sort of confused because socialism is always democratic. Like, that's repetitive. You always vote for socialism. There's two pathways. You either have socialism, where you vote for it, and that is how people who believe in communism believe you progress peacefully from a capitalist society to a communist society, or you have a bloody revolution where you come in and you kill people and you change it to communism quite quickly. So democratic socialism, again, I don't understand what the difference would be between that and just regular socialism. And so when I started digging in, I found out, there's a lot of people who have used the term socialist and meant it for varying different things. This isn't just something I experienced confusion around. Socialists themselves have this own debate around, like, what is socialism? Which, as a libertarian, sort of made me laugh because, same, we do too. But, just to give a couple examples, you had people like the Nazis who said they were National Socialist. If you dig into the policies of the Nazis and are being completely intellectually honest, I don't think most people would call what they were doing a form of socialism. I think that's just what they called themselves. They were closer to nationalists than they were to socialist. Then you have Marxism, who came in, and he was, kind of a more extreme form of socialism than many of his predecessors, and he really saw socialism as a necessary step to communism, talked about that quite frequently, and really wanted to focus on the class aspects within that discussion. And now you have Bernie, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and many of the other people in the squad that say they are democratic socialist. And they've been pressed on this because I think a lot of people have been confused. Like, what's the difference in that and socialism? And what they've done when asked about this is they've pointed to Scandinavian countries, right? They've said that they want to look like Sweden, that they want to look like Norway, that they want to look like Denmark. So it's been a little confusing for people because I think a lot of people don't know very much about those countries. And I think a lot of people don't know very much about socialism, capitalism, cronyism in general, which are all three very different things. That's something else, again, I have to stay focused because I don't want these episodes to be like 3 hours long, but we'll get into that in future episodes. So just to get kind of a common definition, let me know if you think this is fair. After a lot of research, reading a lot of different theory, I think this is the most basic, baseline definition of socialism that probably everybody could agree upon. Like, this is sort of the base. Socialism, popular control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, either by public ownership or through bureaucratic oversight and control. So let's use that definition as we're talking about socialism today, just because we have to agree on some sort of baseline in order to have a fair discussion. So I also did not know very much about these countries. As a true American, I don't spend a lot of time researching other people's countries. I love American history. I love thinking about our political system, thinking about our style of government. Cannot say the same for the rest of the world. I'm not even one of those, like, there's a lot of those men, you know, like that stereotype men that, like, they just love war and they read about war all the time and they start talking to you and they're like popping off about these different battles in World War II and you're like, sir, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, that's not me. I don't care that much about foreign policy other than the fact that I want us to stay out of other people's business. So I started from scratch. That's what I do when I'm trying to figure out what I think about something, how to work through it, is I have to first make sure I have a thorough understanding of the subject. I have an intense fear of looking stupid and uninformed in public, which I think is one reason I'm nervous right now. Can you tell I'm nervous? I don't know why I'm nervous. I'm like sitting in a room in my basement by myself, talking to my computer, but like, I don't know, this is nerve-wracking. It's just a little bit intimidating. So anyways, I started digging in, and what I found is that these countries, they do have a very large social safety net. Within that, they typically get health services, hospitals, child care, parental leave, and free college. Some other interesting tidbits about them: the World Happiness Report ranks Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden at the top. And it looks at GDP, life expectancy, generosity, social support, freedom, and corruption. And lastly, I found that they actually do have a longer life expectancy than the US, about 4 years longer. Now, personally, I'm really not trying to live to age 80, 82. I mean, my back already hurts me so much, and I'm 32. Like, that sounds terrible. But if that's your goal, they're getting some things right over there. So maybe there's some things we could learn from these countries. I started questioning that and really saying, okay, let's be fair and say, like, are there things they do better than us? Should we learn from that, implement that? What's going on? Obviously, there's some big differences. They have vastly big differences in their population size. They are far more homogenous than us. But I didn't recognize just how small these countries are. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark combined have a population that's comparable to the greater New York City region. I mean, New York City is a big region, but that for that many countries, that's not a lot of people. Denmark actually has 5.6 million people living in an area that is half the size of South Carolina. I have been refugeeing in South Carolina during COVID. I was in New York City when it hit, so I got out of there and have been hanging out in a red state, which I highly recommend. And we have about 6 million people, and it is rural here. There are not big cities in South Carolina. It's pretty backwoods in my opinion. So I'm trying to picture Denmark with 5.6 and about half the size of South Carolina. That's not a very big country at all. Also, interestingly, they're very different than us. That they have a long history of social trust, a robust work ethic, we get that, and social cohesion. I don't think anybody would define the U.S. as a country that has a long history of social trust or social cohesion. That's just, we're not there. But maybe we could implement some of these things state by state, right? Like, I think that's one thing people forget is everybody wants things to be done nationally at this point. They want everything done federally. We were never intended to be structured in that way. We were always supposed to have a state-by-state approach so that we could do, test cases for different ideas or solutions to issues in the states, see how they worked, and if they were effective, then the idea was other states would take them up. That was the intention of the founders. So I kept digging, what are they doing to achieve this? Is it really better than what we have here? And as far as is it really better than what we have here, I kind of found it's a mixed bag. Student debt in Sweden is still $19,000 on average, so it's a little bit below our average, but they're paying for their tuition. So I thought that was weird, and I started digging into it, and I found that's how much they're spending for room and board, for their food, for all the other extracurricular things that go along with college. So even though college is being subsidized through taxes, you're still not looking at people who come out debt-free, which, as somebody who went to a private school in the U.S., I share that desire. I think, this is my second episode. I'll go ahead and tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be on why our higher education system is so expensive. I can't wait to dig into that. That's, again, for another day. Also, the happiness trope about these countries sort of fell apart when I started digging into it. If you ask the Finns or the Danes, they were like, we don't know what this World Happiness Report's talking about. We're kind of miserable, which, like, thing. I get it. In 2012, when Denmark ranked number 1 in the World Happiness Report, it actually ranked 100th in a study that measured effective happiness, which is how people actually feel. So I think that report is interesting. I think certainly there are good things happening in these countries, but as far as saying they're so much happier, their way of life is so much better than ours, I don't think that actually holds water. Another important thing is they pay crazy taxes. Crazy taxes. And I think that's what people have to remember when they start talking about these large welfare programs. Here in America, there's this very like childlike idea that we're going to just tax the rich and that they're going to pay for these trillions and trillions of dollars worth of things we want to do. It makes no sense. You could tax every rich person in this country at 100% of their income and still not afford most of these plans. Over in the Scandinavian countries, they know that. They recognize that. They've decided this is what they want to afford their society, and so everybody pays really high taxes. Sweden has a large, broad, flat tax. They take a much larger amount of somebody's income, and they actually impose their top tax rate at a much lower income than we would. They also have a really high value-added tax, VAT tax. So that, you know, you're still paying for these programs. It's not like you just get all these free services and your income stays the same. It doesn't. Denmark, the poor people, they pay about 56% income tax. The middle class pay about 57% of their income tax. The average American has an income that is actually 27% higher than the average Dane. And that's just on income taxes. When they're paying 25% on VAT taxes, everything else they buy. These people don't get to keep very much of their money. Now, when I look at that from my own stance, you know, I'm thinking if I had to pay 55% of my income plus 25% on anything else I bought, in exchange I got health care, childcare, I don't want kids, so that doesn't help me, parental leave, and free college. Would that really be a good deal? I don't think so. But, I mean, maybe for some other people, I don't know. You are free to disagree with me on that, but that sounds like a really bad trade-off, in my opinion. But let's say you still think this sounds great. Then I want to go on to how did they do it, because that's important, right? And actually, if you dig into how they did it, surprise, it was through capitalism. So this is something that, like, I don't know how everybody doesn't know it, but I do, because our media just doesn't actually dig into anything said by anybody anymore. And I think that has less to do with bias and more to do with the fact that they're underfunded and don't have a lot of resources, because it doesn't take a whole lot of digging. I did this in the course of researching over a week, but when I really started looking at what the models of these countries were that they pointed to, I realized quite quickly that they're not socialist at all. They're actually more capitalistic than we are. Their model is what I think would be fair to be called maybe compassionate capitalism. They have strong free markets, they have high taxes in exchange for these generous government entitlement programs, and that's their structure. If you remember our definition of socialism, popular control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, either by public ownership or through bureaucratic oversight and control, they don't do any of that. That's not their model. And, you know, I want to point something out, because this irks me about socialism. When they say popular control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, either by public ownership or through bureaucratic oversight and control, it always ends up being through bureaucratic ownership and control. Like, never, ever, ever would it not, because socialism is antithetical to our basic human nature. It requires some system of force to get people to conduct themselves in a way where they give up so much of the product that they work for. So I just want to point that out, because there's this narrative in America that, like, no, the owners would just own it and control it. It would just be so equal and nobody would fight or push or shove. We'd all just get along. Like, have you tried to board an airline recently? Have you? Have you had like a group 2 boarding pass? The people start pushing up on you like 30 minutes before it's going to be their time to wait. I've been cut in line, literally cut in line by people just trying to board a plane. Who cares? Your seat is assigned. You're not going to lose your seat. Why do you care when you board? But they do, because people want to be first. It's human nature. Anyways, that's my little rant about that. But socialism can take a lot of forms of government control and interfere with free markets. It could be nationalizing industries. It could be subsidizing favored industries, which we seem to do a lot of here in the US. But again, the Nordic countries aren't doing that. It's true that they did once try to. And I think that's where Bernie's view is stuck of these countries. It's stuck in the 1960s, just like the rest of his ideology is. They were wealthy for a while before they started trying socialism in these countries. So it's important to remember that first, they were very capitalistic. In 1776, which was actually before Adam Smith, when he wrote his Wealth of Nations, Sweden's parliament released its own work advocating for the necessity of free markets to create a flourishing economy. Over the next century, they passed considerable legislation, laissez-faire reforms, deregulating their financial sector and promoting free enterprise, free competition, and free trade. They had lower tax rates than the US and most of Europe. And here's what's really important. They sat out the 2 world wars. Those world wars decimated the economy of Europe and the US. And I just have to say, if people are serious about wanting better services here in the US, you probably should have a really hardline stance on foreign policy. This is why we don't have nice things. We spend $686.1 billion in our defense budget for nothing. What do we get for that? Nothing. If we weren't going around trying to police the world, trying to fight boogeymans everywhere we saw them, we would have a lot more resources for our people. So that's a point in case right there. So they were rich because they were smarter about foreign policy than we were, and they didn't get involved in other people's business. So they were doing quite well while the rest of the world was struggling. They got very rich. But then they do what a lot of people do when they get rich off capitalism, which is that they get cocky and they forget the things that allowed them to build wealth in the first place, and they start turning their back on the greatest system the world has ever known. This is what they did. The second half of the 20th century, they started reversing their prosperity, essentially. They took 30 years. They created these generous, kind of cradle-to-grave welfare programs. They were marked with a lot of government interventionism, increase in taxes, a re-regulation of their markets, and this didn't go very well for them. Quite quickly, it went south. So they started doing this like the 1960s, 1970s. By 1990, Sweden had a total tax load of 52% and a corresponding negative impact on businesses and job creation. Businesses fled. Talent fled. IKEA went to the Netherlands. Tetra Pak went to Switzerland. In 1970, Sweden had been the 4th richest of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. By 1993, it dropped to 13th. They had a subsequent financial crisis in the 1990s. They saw their growth in GDP absolutely tank. Unemployment spiked. Government ended up raising their interest rates to 500% to avoid devaluing their currency. Like a hot mess. And so Sweden's longstanding social democratic minister of finance, I can't say his name. I know I'm going to butcher it, and I hate butchering names because I think it's so disrespectful, but I couldn't find anybody to ask, so I'm just going to try. Kjell Olaf Felt said that the whole thing with democratic socialism was absolutely impossible. It just didn't work. There was no way to go but market reform. Part 2 of the Nordic countries. They recognized that they had to go back, so they started reversing course. State-owned companies were sold, financial markets were deregulated, public monopolies replaced with competition, top tax rates were rolled back, government welfare programs were redesigned, and it kept going. And in 2007, even, they abolished their wealth tax, so they keep kind of moving back towards free markets, towards capitalism. If we wanted to look like them right now, if we wanted to actually build policies based around the things they've done to create affluence in their society so that they have the income generated to fund these massive welfare programs, here's some things we would have to do. We'd have to open up our trade, more free trade. We'd have to deregulate our product market. We'd have to end Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, abolish occupational licensing, end the minimum wage. They have no minimum wage. Abolition of taxes on property, gifts, and inheritance. We'd need to reduce our corporate tax rate. We'd have to reform our Social Security from defined benefits to defined contributions and introduce private account options. And we'd have to adopt a comprehensive school voucher system. These sound like the policies that the libertarians advocate for. These sound nothing like the policies that Bernie Sanders or AOC or any of their ilk advocate for. At all. At all. They actually work against these things, quite ardently work against these things. Oh, and one more thing. I thought this was interesting. These countries don't have unions. Well, they do have unions, but they're not backed up by the government like our unions. The government stays out of hiring and firing decisions of businesses. They let businesses hire the best people. They let businesses let go of people not working for them. And they don't tell businesses how much to pay somebody or what their worth is or what their value is on the market. So radically different than a lot of the things we see democratic socialists pushing for. So, all of that to say, you can see quite clearly through this case study of these countries that it is only through free market capitalism that they have been able to flourish and to succeed. Currently, they rank really high on the Economic Freedom Index. Heritage marks Denmark as the 8th freest country on its Economic Freedom Index. That's based on competitive corporate tax rate, market openness, and regulatory efficiency. Finland, Sweden appear in the top 15. The US is ranked 17th. So, what's going on here? Did Bernie and AOC just forget to actually look at what was going on in these countries? I don't think so. I think they're slippery. I think they know exactly what they're doing. As I dug in a bit more, what I found was the term democratic socialism actually isn't new. It was just new to me. Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, they've been around here in the US since the early 80s. And really, when you really try to figure out what a definition for democratic socialism would be, it's just a catch-all term that means you don't want revolution. You want to achieve this system through voting, through peaceful practices. It could mean anything from libertarian socialism, which, yes, does exist, all the way to revolutionary socialism. So the only thing that's new about this term is Bernie's definition. And I don't think it's an accident that he points to Scandinavia instead of places where his real ideas are actually being implemented and practiced, which are places like Cuba and Venezuela and North Korea and China. And I just want to read you some quotes because it's so explicit how they try to mislead the American public. This is a quote from AOC. "My policies most closely resemble what we see in the UK, Norway, Finland, and in Sweden." Bernie, "I think we should look to countries like Denmark, like Sweden, and Norway and learn what they've accomplished for their working people." Well, Bernie, I agree, and what they've done is implement free market capitalism. So if that becomes your goal, I'd love to work with you. Love to. These people are lying. They're intentionally pointing to places that have tried their proposals, that have failed at their proposals, seen what a massive, colossal failure they were, and have run the opposite direction back away from them. The reasons for this are obvious. If they were to point to these places where their policies are actually in place, everyone would be terrified because every single place where their policies are actually in place are absolute hellholes. Nobody is even trying to vacation in Venezuela. Nobody is trying to go hang out in Vietnam. These are places where human rights violations are committed at a rate that is startling in the modern world. People are starving. They can't get basic medicines. So that is a sleight of hand that I think they are very well aware of. And this is just their attempt to soften socialism, to repackage it and try to convince a new generation, one that's not being taught history, political theory, economic theory in our school system, and make them think it's not so bad. And largely, it's going to work because people aren't being taught how to think, how to reason, how to do research like this and dig in and see what the truth is. And that makes me mad because that means they're trying to take advantage of people and mislead them. It's pretty smart on their part because socialism is deeply unpopular for a good reason. It kills people. They say it's never really been done. I'll give them that. But I will also say that every time it has been attempted, it has led to poverty, to destitution, to people not having basic resources. And anytime capitalism has been tried, and I would argue it also has not been fully put into effect, even though it has not been put into effect, every time it has been tried, capitalism has led to massive economic growth, innovation, expanding life expectancy. We see the greatest flourishing the world has ever known over the past century globally because of the spreading of capitalism to countries across this world. If you look at polling of Americans, I found this encouraging because in my circles it feels like probably like at least 80% of people like socialism. Thank God that's not what this poll found. NPR and PBS/Merit's poll found that only 28% of American adults actually view socialism favorably, whereas 51% view capitalism favorably. This is why Bernie is actually a huge problem for the DNC. I don't want to get sidetracked on this, but the DNC worked really hard to make sure that he wasn't the nominee in the past two elections. And the reason for that is because they know socialism loses when you get to the general public. But they've had to try to find ways to keep him in the folds, to keep his very enthusiastic following and crowd within their camp. And I think it'll be interesting to see what they try to do to mitigate that. So while those numbers are encouraging to me, as someone who knows socialism is a bad, failed ideology, The numbers are still growing. The DSA actually added about 20,000 people over the past few years, and they now have 70,000 official members. So it's a growing movement in this country. There's no denying that. What I found, though, is that others within it are actually a lot more honest than Bernie and AOC. The DSA website, Democratic Socialist of America, it says, at the root of socialism is a profound commitment to democracy as means and end. As we are unlikely to see an immediate end to capitalism tomorrow, the DSA fights for reforms today that will weaken the power of corporations and increase the power of working people. Now, there's probably some things I could agree with in there. I think we should decrease the power of corporations who are often using the government to rig the system for themselves. But again, we're going to have very different ideas of how we do that. The Jacobian, which is a socialist outlet, these are a few quotes from their writers. One says, "We want to end capitalism in the long run by pursuing a reform agenda that focuses on class hierarchy, class warfare, and inequality." A second one says, "A robust welfare state and an economy that's still organized around capitalist profit can mitigate the worst inequalities for a while, but it is at best a temporary truce between bosses and workers." Staff writer Megan Day says, "Here's the truth. In the long run, democratic socialists want to end capitalism. And we want to do that by pursuing a reform agenda today in an effort to revive a politics focused on class hierarchy and inequality in the U.S. The eventual goal is to transform the world to promote everyone's needs rather than to produce massive profit for a handful of citizens." At least they are honest. I can appreciate that. We can have a real discussion starting from that place. I will say, though, that her goal that includes ending the production of massive profits is not what has allowed the Nordic countries to fund all their massive welfare programs. You need profits to pay for things. But to put it another way, these people don't want to achieve socialism through revolution, but they are fundamentally anti-capitalist, and they want to destroy our system and our way of life. That's what they're after. So what I have to end up with here is that I have a lot of affection for socialists. Again, I think there's many areas I can agree with them on. I think they are misled on the ways we fix some of the problems in our society, but we agree on things like government corruption, corporate welfare, war, social justice. I share these goals of equal opportunity and a better, more fair world. The goal isn't to dunk on them or own them. That's not what I'm here to do. But I do want them to be upfront about what they're trying to accomplish and how, and point to places where some of these things have actually been tried so that we can have an honest discussion. And I think many in America are being misled on the realities of that, where it exists and what its end goals are. So, like I said, in the future, I'm going to circle back. I'll talk about socialism more in depth. I'm not trying to sort of just come in here and say they're lying about the Nordic countries and then get out. There's a lot more to say about socialism. I just don't have time to do it all in one episode. For now, it's important to know that the Democratic Socialists are selling is literally just plain old free market socialism. And if they really wanted to be like Scandinavia, then I've got some free market reforms that we could work on together. I would love for them to join me in that. All right, I hope you have enjoyed this first episode of Based. Thanks for sticking with me through my nerves. Thanks for all of your support as I get ready to launch this show. I'm really excited. It's going to be a learning process. I promise you that. I am a one-woman band vodcaster. I'm doing the tech, I'm doing the lighting, I'm doing my own makeup, and I'm writing the scripts and doing the research, and I'm, editing. I'm doing all of it. So it's a lot to take on. I'm learning. Bear with me. I'm sure I'll make mistakes, but I am really excited about this and can't wait to see where we go next.